Hello, my friend. If your day has been long or restless, let this be the quiet that follows. Tonight, we'll wander far back in time, not to palaces or temples, but to the earliest dream of the world itself. This will be a gentle bedtime history story, soft, unhurried, and made to help you rest as we drift through the myths of ancient Greece. We'll follow the whispers of creation, when there was only darkness, and listen as the first gods awaken, not in thunder, but in silence. This isn't a lesson or a lecture. It's a slow journey through memory, where every tale feels like candlelight flickering against the night. A relaxing historical storytelling meant to soothe your mind and carry you toward calm. Where are you listening from tonight? A quiet room, a distant city, maybe somewhere where the air already feels like sleep. Tell me in the comments. It's strangely comforting to know who else is out there listening to the same old stories beneath the same sky. And if these bedtime history stories bring you peace, you can subscribe and return whenever the night feels heavy again. Now, close your eyes. Let your breath slow. A door opens toward another time, not brighter, just quieter. Together, let's step into the beginning, softly, where silence was the first sound of creation. Before there was sound, before there was breath, before there was even the idea of beginning, there was only stillness. Not the kind that follows music or sleep, but a stillness without memory, a silence so complete that it didn't know itself to be silent. They would later call it chaos, though that word came long after, given by storytellers who needed something to name the unnameable. In truth, it was not disorder or noise, but possibility, the soft waiting before everything chooses to exist. Imagine an endless dark that isn't frightening, only vast. A quiet that doesn't crush, only holds. In that space, nothing moved, and yet something trembled, like a thought beginning to dream of itself. And from that tremble came Gaia Earth, patient, round, eternal. She was not born as a goddess of flesh, but as the feeling of ground beneath everything, a warmth gathering in the void, shaping the first body, wide enough for futures to rest upon. Her being was calm, her surface still unbroken by sea or mountain. She slept in herself, and the silence hummed gently around her edges. But even stillness longs for company. From the shadow beneath her roots came Tartarus, the depth, the first abyss. He was darkness given form, a vast hollow meant to cradle all that would fall. Not evil, only quiet beyond understanding, the echo beneath creation's first heartbeat. And then, between them, something new awoke. Eros, not yet the god of affection or longing, but a force more ancient, the pulse that draws one thing toward another. He was warmth without body, movement without shape. Where he drifted, the emptiness began to breathe. Through him, Gaia and Tartarus were not simply two beings apart. They became connected, drawn to one another by the first whisper of desire, the earliest song of union. And out of that first harmony, more shapes rose. From shadow came Erebus, the darkness between places, and Nyx, the night herself, her wings vast and soft, folding the universe in quiet. When Nyx flew, even silence bent around her. From her came children of contrast, day, called Hemera, and light, called Aether. They chased each other endlessly across the newborn sky, their meeting and parting forming the pulse of time. In the space between night and day, the first dawn flickered pale and uncertain, like a candle testing the air. Gaia felt the stirring within her heart. The endless sky above was still empty, and she longed for something to rise, to lean over her, to complete the curve of her horizon. From that yearning came Uranus, the sky, clear and shimmering. He stretched himself across her with endless gentleness, his body a dome of stars and wind. Where they touched, life began to hum. Where she rose, he arched. Where she sighed, he thundered softly in reply. It was not yet love, but recognition, the first companionship between what is firm and what is free. Together they shaped the earliest balance. She held, he hovered. She bore weight, he gave breath. Between them lay the space where everything else would unfold: oceans, forests, wind and fire, still unborn but waiting. Even silence seemed to glow within that balance, a kind of music that had no need for sound. In those days there were no names, no boundaries, only the rhythm of creation stretching and folding back on itself. The stars had not yet been scattered. The moon did not yet climb. The air was soft, heavy with promise. Every movement was slow, as if the universe were learning how to breathe. Gaia's body stirred with possibilities, mountains pressing upward like slow sighs, rivers dreaming beneath her skin, seeds of forest still sleeping inside her bones. And above, Uranus began to shimmer with hidden lights, faint constellations like thoughts forming for the first time. When his breath passed across her fields, the first winds were born. They carried the scent of what would someday be rain. And when his tears fell, not sorrow, but condensation of wonder, they touched her soil and made it fertile. The poets would later call this the marriage of earth and sky, but perhaps it was something gentler, the meeting of patience and possibility. There was no temple to house them, no prayer to praise them, only the quiet acknowledgement that something had begun. Not with thunder, not with command, but with stillness deciding to move. Creation, in those first moments, was not loud. It did not need to shout to be real. It happened the way breathing happens in sleep, soft, unconscious, inevitable. The gods would come later, their rivalries, their stories, their noise. But before all of that, there was this, the hush of existence, taking its first, tender breath. And if you listen closely enough, perhaps you can still hear it, the faint echo of that sigh, older than the stars, still moving quietly through every grain of soil, every gust of wind, every pulse that stirs the heart to life. It whispers not of power or fear, but of belonging, a reminder that everything began in the same silence that now surrounds you, that you are, in some small way, part of that first calm, that the world began, not with a bang, but with a breath. When the first quiet age began to breathe, the world was still young enough to dream without fear. Earth and sky lay together in perfect accord, Gaia below, steady and nurturing, Uranus above, vast and protective. Every evening, his body of stars would lower upon her, and she would answer with warmth from her depths. In those moments, creation was gentle. It was not yet crowded with gods or noise, only the soft exchange between soil and starlight. From their union came life unlike anything before, not fragile or fleeting, but immense. The Titans, 12 in number, 6 daughters, 6 sons. Their names, whispered by poets long after, carried the sound of mountains, rivers, and time itself: Oceanus, the encircling sea; Hyperion, the flame of the sun; Thea, radiant sight; Themis, law and balance; Mnemosyne, memory; and Cronus, the youngest, born with eyes that seemed already to understand the world's turning. They rose from Gaia's body like peaks from the earth, strong, beautiful, and solemn. Each carried something vast within: strength, wisdom, patience, hunger. They were not merely children, but embodiments of the elements themselves. When they spoke, their voices echoed through valleys that had not yet learned to hold sound. When they walked, the air bent around them, and Gaia loved them all. But Uranus, for all his vastness, felt unease. He saw in them not wonder, but warning. Perhaps it was their size, perhaps the way they looked back at him without fear. In their faces, he saw the reflection of his own power and the shadow of his own end. For even the sky, eternal as it seemed, felt the weight of mortality in their growing forms. Fear, when held by something infinite, becomes cruelty. Uranus began to dread his children. He could not destroy them, for they were of his own blood and of Gaia's heart. So instead, he did something darker. He forced them back into her womb, pushing them down into the caverns beneath the world. The Titans, each immense and full of light, were buried in the darkness of their mother's body. Gaia cried out, not in rage, but in pain, the deep, wordless pain of a mother made into a prison. Inside her, her children groaned and called to her. Their voices rolled through the stone like distant thunder, shaping the mountains from the pressure of their confinement. Rivers burst forth where her tears fell. Even the stars dimmed, ashamed to witness her sorrow. She pleaded with Uranus, begging him to free them, to see them as gifts rather than threats. But the sky was deaf to her grief. He looked down and saw only order, only control. The heavens gleamed, and the world grew silent again, but beneath that silence, resentment began to bloom. For a long age, Gaia endured. She carried the weight of her children in her depths, her surface trembling with suppressed life. Even the flowers that dared to bloom did so quietly, unsure if the light above was friend or jailer. Then one night, as Uranus descended once more, she decided she could no longer bear it. In the darkness beneath her surface, she began to move. From the unbroken stone of her body, she drew a shard, cold, sharp, and perfect. Her hands, steady though trembling, shaped it into a sickle of grey flint, curved like the crescent moon that watched from behind the clouds. It was not a weapon of rage, but of resolve forged not in hatred, but in necessity. She called softly to her children, still trapped within her. "Who among you," she whispered, "will help me bring light to the world again?" At first, there was only silence, the kind that hides fear. One by one, the Titans turned away, their hearts too heavy to defy the sky. But the youngest, Cronus, opened his eyes. He had always been the watcher, patient and still. He felt his mother's sorrow like a heartbeat within him. When he reached for the sickle, it did not feel like rebellion. It felt like balance, a truth that had been waiting to be restored. He took the blade, its edge glowing faintly with the warmth of Gaia's will, and she said only, "Do not hate him. End this, so the world may breathe again." When Uranus came once more to lie across the earth, the stars glittering like watchful eyes, Cronus waited in the shadows of his mother's valleys. The air was heavy, still. No gods yet walked the sky. No wind dared to stir. Then, with a single motion swift, inevitable, the sickle struck. There was no scream, only the soft sound of breath breaking like the snapping of an old thread. The sky recoiled, wounded, his blood falling through the heavens like crimson rain. Where it touched the earth, strange things were born, the giants, the furies, and from the foam of the sea, Aphrodite, shining and whole, beauty drawn from pain. Uranus retreated, his voice echoing across the edges of creation. "As I fall, so shall you, my son. What you do now will be done to you." The curse lingered in the air long after his light faded. Cronus stood trembling, the sickle heavy in his hand. He looked to Gaia, who watched with sorrow and pride. The world was free again, wide, open, and filled with breath. The stars shone brighter, the rivers ran clear, and the sky no longer pressed down upon the earth. Yet in the stillness that followed, a faint unease remained. The deed was done, but the pattern had begun. The cycle of creation and rebellion, of parent and child, of love that becomes fear, and fear that becomes defiance. Even Gaia, who had suffered and triumphed, felt it, for she knew what Uranus had known before her, that every beginning hides its own ending, and that even peace carries the seed of change. The night deepened. The new gods slept within their mother's heart, unknowing that destiny had already whispered their names. Above them, the stars flickered like the memory of a promise. The first age had ended not with war, but with a single act of courage and sorrow, and from that quiet betrayal, the wheel of history began to turn. The world was quiet again. The wound between earth and sky had closed, though its memory lingered in the air like the scent after a storm. Uranus had vanished beyond the heavens, and Cronus, the youngest of the Titans, now stood as ruler of all things beneath the stars. He did not roar or conquer. His reign began like dawn breaking after a long night. It was said that this was the Golden Age, a time when the earth herself gave without demand. Grain ripened without hands to sow it. Rivers flowed with clarity and kindness, and fruit bent the branches of trees until they touched the ground. No one knew hunger, for Gaia still remembered her pain and offered abundance in place of sorrow. The air was warm, the seasons steady, and no creature lifted weapon against another. It was a world where labor was unknown, and trust was as natural as breathing. Mortals, the first soft creations of this new age, lived in gentle harmony. They built no walls, for there was nothing to fear. They had no kings, for they needed no rule. When they spoke, the wind carried their words kindly. When they slept, the earth cradled them like a mother holding her children. And above them all, Cronus watched. His golden sickle hung high, now a symbol of harvest rather than rebellion. He was not cruel. He listened to the murmurs of the rivers and the songs of the birds. He walked among the valleys and smiled upon the children of earth. To many, he was a patient guardian, calm, even-tempered, the god of time as it moved slowly and mercifully. Under his rule, everything lived in rhythm, birth without pain, death without fear, growth without greed. It was as if the universe itself had exhaled and found peace. But peace, even the deepest kind, carries an echo, and deep within that echo, destiny stirred. The words of Uranus, that faint curse cast into the night, began to take shape in Cronus's thoughts. It whispered to him not as thunder, but as memory. As I fall, so shall you, my son. At first, Cronus brushed it aside. He believed himself wiser than his father, gentler, more just. Yet prophecy, once spoken, does not sleep. It moved quietly through him like a shadow beneath sunlight, and soon he began to see patterns that unsettled him. The endless turning of things, the way every bloom must fade, every tide must fall. He looked upon the perfection of his world and saw not comfort, but the outline of loss. Rhea, his sister and queen, tried to soothe him. She reminded him of the harmony they had built, of the songs mortals sang to thank the gods, of the laughter of the streams. But even as she spoke, Cronus's eyes grew distant. He loved her, yet within that love hid the seed of dread. For the prophecy did not say when, only who that one of his own children would rise against him, as he once had against his father. And so fear began to drip into the golden world, slow and silent as sap. It touched everything it passed through. Cronus, the god of time, began to count what he could not stop. He measured days where none had needed counting, watched the sun's slow arc, and found in its return a quiet unease. Even in paradise, the awareness of ending had awoken. Still, the world continued in beauty. The earth flowered endlessly, the skies remained soft and blue, and mortals lived without pain or illness. Children were born into laughter, and their first breath smelled of honey and grass. But Cronus felt the weight of each birth like the striking of a hidden bell. Every new life was a reminder, a spark of what might one day surpass him. When Rhea became pregnant, joy rippled through creation. The gods sang softly in her honor. The mountains shimmered with golden light. But for Cronus, the prophecy returned, louder than ever. He could almost hear his father's voice again, woven into the rustling of the leaves. The son will repeat the father. The circle does not break. At night, he dreamed of his sickle, its blade glinting not with harvest light, but with memory. He saw himself not as ruler, but as echo, another link in an unending chain. The fear grew, quiet but heavy, like clouds before a storm. And fear, once seeded, seeks survival. When Rhea's first child was born, Cronus trembled. He looked upon the infant soft, innocent, divine, and saw both beauty and threat. He remembered Gaia's face the night she gave him the sickle, the sorrow in her voice when she said, "End this, so the world may breathe again." Oh, and now, in his son's cry, he heard the same promise that one day the child would end him so that the world might continue. So Cronus did the unthinkable. He lifted the baby in his hands, and before Rhea could stop him, he swallowed it whole. There was no scream, no blood, only the silence of inevitability. The child vanished into his body, hidden in the endless darkness of his being. And when he was done, Cronus sat quietly, trembling. He told himself it was mercy, not cruelty, that by consuming his child, he had preserved the world's balance, postponed the end of peace. But peace built upon fear is only a fragile mirror. The golden age continued, but it gleamed less brightly. The mortals still danced, but their songs grew slower. The rivers still flowed, but their laughter dimmed. And Rhea wept in secret, her sorrow carried by the wind that whispered through the reeds. One by one, each new child met the same fate, swallowed at birth by the father who feared them. Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia all vanished into his endless stomach, hidden away like stars behind a shroud. The gods who would rule the world were sleeping inside him, waiting for the right breath of fate to wake them. Cronus continued to reign, the master of an age too perfect to last. He smiled still, spoke kindly, and ruled with gentle authority. But when night fell, and he sat alone beneath the quiet constellations, he could feel the weight of time pressing on him. Even gods, he thought, cannot escape what they have done or what waits for them to repeat. Thus, the Golden Age became a meditation on balance, beauty, trembling under the faint pulse of fear. The earth still gave freely, but the heart of its ruler had begun to close. And somewhere deep within that vast, silent God, the swallowed children dreamed of sunlight and freedom, of a future that would someday come, for even in darkness, destiny breathes. The world had grown hushed beneath the rule of Cronus. The rivers still shone like ribbons of gold. The trees still bent with fruit, yet the air carried something sorrowful. Every song seemed to end too soon. Every mother's laughter held an echo of fear. Rhea, queen of the gods, felt it most deeply, the quiet ache of a womb that had given life only to lose it. Each time she bore a child, she hoped, and each time, that hope ended in silence. Cronus came to her gently, not in cruelty but in dread, and took the newborn into his hands. He would whisper something, perhaps an apology, perhaps a prayer before the unthinkable act, and then there would be only stillness again. The swallowed children slept within him, sealed away in darkness, like seeds waiting for spring that never came. The world did not speak of it. The mortals still praised Cronus, unaware that their god of time had turned inward, consuming his own future. Even Gaia, their mother, watched in grief, unable to stop what destiny had already written. And yet, somewhere beneath that grief, a small ember of defiance began to glow. When Rhea became pregnant once more, she carried not only life, but resolve. This time, she would not surrender her child to the wheel of prophecy. She wandered to the edge of the earth, where the sky bent low, and the sea whispered secrets no god dared to hear. There she knelt before Gaia, her ancient mother, and spoke through tears. "Help me keep this one." Gaia's voice rose softly from the ground, like wind through grass. "My daughter, the world turns as it must, but even the turning can be delayed by love. Go to Crete, a place veiled by sea and mist. There, the child may breathe beyond his father's hunger." Rhea bowed her head, and the earth opened a path of moss and stone. She followed it through forests that hummed with old magic, until she reached the island wrapped in clouds, a cradle carved by time itself. The cave awaited her deep, dripping secret. Inside, the air smelled of rain and milk. The walls glistened with faint light, as though the stones remembered stars. Rhea's body ached with labor. The child's heartbeat thrummed beneath her ribs like a drum calling dawn. And when at last he came into the world, the silence broke not with thunder, but with a cry so pure that even the mountains listened. She held him close, this small, perfect fragment of eternity, and named him Zeus. He was warm and weightless, his eyes still closed, his breath soft against her skin. In that fragile sound of breathing, Rhea felt something she had not known for ages, hope that dared to exist. She kissed his forehead, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause, as if listening to a promise it had almost forgotten. Outside, the sea sighed against the cliffs, keeping her secret. But time, relentless as the tide, reminded her Cronus would soon come. So Rhea wrapped the child in wool as soft as clouds, laid him in a cradle of myrtle leaves, and whispered blessings in the old tongue, words only the wind and mothers remember. Then, from the mountain's heart, Gaia lifted a stone smooth, heavy, and shaped by the river's patience. Rhea swaddled it in cloth and cradled it to her chest. When Cronus appeared, his shadow filled the cave's entrance. His eyes were calm but tired, his voice gentle as he spoke. "Give him to me." Rhea's heart hammered, but her face did not tremble. She stepped forward and offered the stone wrapped in linen. Cronus took it carefully, as though afraid it might cry. He looked at her sorrow and suspicion flickering for just a breath, then closed his eyes and swallowed. The cave was silent again. Cronus turned and vanished into the light. Rhea sank to her knees, her hands pressed over her heart. The lie had worked. For the first time, one of her children had escaped the darkness. But the weight of what she had done, of the deceit and danger, pressed upon her like a second sky. When night fell, she returned to the cave's deepest hollow, where nymphs and spirits of the island waited. They took the infant Zeus and rocked him in a cradle hung from the trees, so that he would never touch the earth or sky, hidden from both parents' gaze. There, the divine goat Amalthea came, her coat white as foam, her eyes bright with kindness. From her, the child drank, his small mouth drawing life from ancient generosity. To keep him safe, the Curetes, armored guardians of Crete, danced around the cave. Their bronze shields clashed in rhythm, drowning the baby's cries beneath the sound of divine celebration. To any listening god, it was only a storm or festival, never the voice of a living heir. And so, beneath dripping stone and flickering torchlight, the last child of Rhea grew. He played with bees that glowed like amber, learned the language of rain, and slept to the low hum of mountain wind. Time itself seemed slower in that cave each day, a lullaby of secrecy and survival. When he laughed, the echoes lingered, as if the air knew it was keeping a secret too precious to release. Rhea returned often, though never for long. She would kneel beside him and sing songs of stars and oceans, her fingers tracing the curls of his hair. "Grow quietly, my child," she would whisper. "Grow strong, but do not hurry. The world will find you soon enough." And sometimes she would pause and look toward the heavens, wondering if Cronus could sense the hollow where destiny was waiting. Above them, the sky turned with serene indifference. Cronus still ruled, believing himself safe, his heart slightly lighter for what he thought he had done. He smiled again at the mortals, at the harvests, at the passing clouds, never guessing that in a small cave far to the south, his undoing slept peacefully beneath the lull of dripping water. And there, amid milk and moonlight, the child who would change the heavens grew in secret. The world outside remained golden, unaware that its balance was quietly shifting. Because even destiny needs time to learn how to walk, and every storm begins as a whisper. In the heart of Crete, the whisper had already begun, soft, rhythmic, and alive. Time passed like a slow tide upon stone. In the hidden cave of Crete, Zeus grew beneath the lull of dripping water and the hum of unseen winds. The world above him had changed little, still golden, still bright, but beneath its calm surface, fate had begun to move again. The boy who had been hidden from fear was now becoming the one who would face it. The nymphs taught him to speak with trees and rivers. The mountain winds whispered names of stars. From Amalthea, his nurse, he learned gentleness, how strength could protect rather than destroy. But even as he laughed among the goats and sunlight, a shadow stirred in his dreams. He saw flashes of chains, voices calling from within a dark belly, the echo of brothers and sisters trapped in eternal night. He did not yet know who they were, but he felt their longing as if it were his own. When he came of age, Gaia appeared before him, vast, serene, her voice like the turning of the earth itself. "My child," she said, "your father carries within him those who once shared your cradle. The time has come to return what was taken." Zeus bowed his head. "How can I, when his power covers the heavens?" Gaia's eyes shimmered with patience. "Even the sky cannot rule what lies beneath. Go to him, not with anger, but with truth." Lax. So Zeus left Crete, stepping into the world that had been waiting for him since before his first breath. The land trembled beneath his stride, not in fear, but in recognition. He climbed through the clouds to meet his father, and when Cronus saw him, the air itself seemed to pause. For in that young god's gaze was the calm of destiny, the stillness that comes before a storm too vast to resist. Cronus greeted him with cautious warmth. He did not yet know his son, nor the shape of the threat he carried. But Rhea, standing nearby, felt her heart seize with both joy and dread, for she saw what neither husband nor son could yet admit, that one was the echo of the other, and that the circle was about to close. Zeus spoke softly. "Father, you have ruled with justice. Let me serve you." Cronus smiled, weary but proud. "Then drink with me, child, and honor the peace we have kept." What he did not see was the small vial in Zeus's hand, a gift from Gaia, mixed from Earth's oldest herbs and sea foam's memory. When Cronus drank, his body shuddered. A deep rumble rolled through the mountains, and from within him came the cries of those long-imprisoned Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia rising like wind through stone. Cronus fell to his knees as his children burst forth, reborn and blazing. The world quaked as the Titan's strength faltered, and for the first time, Zeus beheld his siblings radiant, fierce, each carrying the light of freedom in their eyes. They embraced him, their voices trembling between disbelief and gratitude. Together, they turned toward the horizon, where thunder gathered beyond the peaks. The age of silence was over. Thus began the Titanomachy, the War of Gods. It lasted 10 long years, echoing through the heavens and beneath the earth. The Titans, led by Cronus and the unbroken strength of Atlas, stood upon Mount Othrys. The new gods, young yet unyielding, gathered upon Olympus. Between them stretched the vast middle-world valleys shattered by storm, oceans boiling beneath lightning, forests burning and reborn in the same breath. Zeus wielded thunder, the pure sound of command. Poseidon struck the sea with his trident, raising walls of water against the Titans' advance. Hades, silent and patient, gathered the shadows and turned them into armor. Yet for all their might, the battle lingered in stalemate. The Titans were ancient, vast as continents, and each blow they took seemed only to make the world tremble harder. One night, as the war hung between exhaustion and despair, Gaia came again to Zeus. Her voice was quieter now, heavy with age and sorrow. "You cannot win above while the power below lies bound," she said. "Seek the depths the brothers who were cast away before your birth." Zeus descended through the cracks of the world, past layers of fire and time, until he reached Tartarus. There, chained by the will of Cronus, lay the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncures, the 100-handed ones. Their eyes gleamed in the dark, full of old rage and faint hope. "Free us," they rumbled, "and we will forge for you the weapons of the new age." And Zeus struck their chains with lightning, and the bindings melted like wax. The freed beings rose, shaking the underworld with joy. The Cyclopes took hammers and anvils and shaped gifts for the young gods, symbols not of chaos, but of balance reborn. To Zeus, they gave the thunderbolt, the light that splits night from day. To Poseidon, the trident, the spear that stirs the deep. To Hades, the helm of darkness, which renders the unseen unconquerable. And as they offered them, they said, "These are not weapons of war alone. They are the echoes of creation, light, sea, and shadow. Wield them wisely, for they will decide the rhythm of all things." Zeus ascended once more, his siblings beside him, their strength renewed. The final battle broke like dawn. Mountains cracked, and the sky rolled with waves of gold and ash. The Titans roared like collapsing cliffs, but the younger gods moved with the certainty of a rising tide. Zeus's thunder split the clouds, Poseidon's seas surged upward to meet it, and Hades' unseen power wrapped the enemy in stillness. One by one, the Titans fell. Oceanus fled to the farthest waters. Hyperion's flame was quenched by storm. At last, Cronus himself was struck down not with cruelty, but with sorrowful finality. Zeus stood before him, his thunderbolt raised, then lowered. He spoke softly, "The time of fathers is done. Rest, and let the world turn anew." End quote. With that, the war ended. The Titans were cast into Tartarus, their thunder fading beneath the earth. The 100-handed guarded the gates, while the Cyclopes returned to their forges, hammering the echoes of victory into the rhythm of the world. Above, the sky cleared, the sea grew calm, the land, scarred, yet fertile, exhaled. Zeus and his siblings stood upon Olympus, no longer hidden children, but rulers of the new age. The air shimmered with quiet inevitability, as though even the stars bowed to the change. They did not celebrate loudly. They looked out across the world, their world now, and felt both awe and weight. From that silence rose the age of the Olympians. It did not begin with triumph, but with balance restored the old, giving way to the new, the storm settling into peace. And for the first time since creation, the heavens stood open and clear, waiting to be written with the stories yet to come. When the thunder finally faded, the world stood still, not broken, only changed. Smoke rose from the valleys where mountains had cracked. The rivers ran wide again, washing away the dust of war. The air smelled new, like the earth after rain. It was not peace that followed, but balanced the fragile quiet that comes when everything has found its place again. The Titans were gone, buried deep beneath the world in Tartarus, where silence and shadow would hold them forever. The 100-handed ones stood guard at the gates, their breathing slow as mountains. And above, on the high crest of Olympus, the new gods gathered brothers and sisters, born from both pain and renewal. They had seen what power could destroy and what love could preserve. Now they faced the quieter task, to decide who would hold which part of existence. Zeus stood before them, the storm still faintly alive in his eyes. Beside him were Poseidon, calm and deep as the sea, and Hades, silent and watchful, his gaze like a well that saw too much. These three, once swallowed in darkness, now held the fate of creation in their hands. But even among gods, fairness must be sought, and so they agreed to cast lots, leaving destiny to decide what ambition could not. Zeus reached into the golden urn that Rhea herself had blessed. From it, each drew a fate, one for the sky, one for the sea, one for the realm below. When they opened their palms, the order of the cosmos was written. To Zeus, the sky, the wide expanse of cloud and light, the realm of thunder and dawn. He would watch over the heavens, the winds, and the laws that held both gods and men. To Poseidon, the sea, the shifting mirror of the world, forever restless, forever returning. His trident would guide the tides, stir storms, and cradle the life that moved beneath the waves. To Hades, the underworld, not as punishment, but as balance. He would guard the shadows where souls came to rest, ensuring that death remained not terror, but passage. His helm of invisibility would give him dominion over what was unseen, yet essential. Zeus looked at his brothers and nodded. "There is no envy among us," he said softly, though a quiet unease rippled beneath his words. "For even gods are not free from wanting what others hold. But for this moment, peace lingered, the kind born not of victory, but of agreement." From the top of Olympus, they could see all realms at once, the blue arc of heaven, the glittering line of sea, the deep whisper of the earth below. It was decided Olympus would be their meeting place, their home between worlds, a place where light and wind met stone and cloud. There the gods would dwell, ruling not as tyrants, but as stewards of the new order. And so, one by one, the others took their place around Zeus, each a reflection of something the world itself carried within. Hera, his queen and sister, the goddess of marriage and dignity, her eyes shone with intelligence, her heart fierce with loyalty and pride. She would watch over unions and oaths, binding gods and mortals alike. Yet in her devotion, jealousy slept, waiting to wake. Demeter, gentle and constant, guardian of harvest and growth. Her hands smelled of grain, and her voice carried the patience of seasons. She would keep the earth fertile and mourn its winters, knowing that every loss feeds renewal. Hestia, quiet flame of the hearth, whose presence warmed both palace and cottage. She spoke seldom, but her calm steadied even the quarrels of gods. Where her light burned, peace followed, invisible but enduring. Then came the younger generation, the children born of Olympus itself, radiant with purpose. Athena, born from Zeus's mind, sharp as wisdom itself. She carried no weapon she did not first weigh with thought. Her gaze could see both truth and mercy, and her calm often disarmed where swords would fail. Apollo, the Golden One, god of light, music, and prophecy. He sang the world awake each morning and reminded it of its beauty. His twin, Artemis, goddess of the hunt and moonlight, walked silently through forests, her arrows swift but her compassion deep. She was the calm balance to his radiance, night answering day. Ares, restless and proud, the spirit of war, He loved conflict as flame loves air, yet even his fury was part of the world's pulse, for without struggle, courage could not be known. Aphrodite, born from sea foam, stepped among them, her presence soft yet commanding. Where she moved, desire stirred. Where she lingered, hearts opened or broke. She reminded even the immortals that creation and longing are twins. Hermes, quick and clever, messenger between realms. He crossed sky and underworld with ease, laughter always at his heel. Where others saw walls, he saw paths. He was the bridge between thought and action, between gods and mortals. And last, Hephaestus, the smith, quiet and steadfast. His hands, scarred by labor, shaped the beauty others imagined. From fire and patience, he forged not only weapons, but art proof that creation endures, even in imperfection. Together they formed the 12, the Olympians, each voice different, yet harmonizing in the music of order. Their presence filled the air like constellations finding their pattern. Yet even among such radiance, the old truth lingered. Where family gathers, so too gather love and rivalry, tenderness and pride. The gods were divine, but their hearts still mirrored those who would one day worship them, flawed, hopeful, endlessly yearning. As the sun set on the first day of their reign, Zeus stood upon the peak, watching the world beneath. The sky glowed amber, the sea shimmered, and the shadows of Hades stretched gently below, neither cruel nor cold. It was a fragile equilibrium, but it was enough. He raised his hand, and thunder rolled softly across the horizon, not as warning, but as promise. This, he said, is the order of things. Sky above, sea around, earth below. Let each keep its rhythm, and may harmony outlast power. The wind carried his words through every corner of the world. Birds took flight, rivers stilled, even the stars seemed to listen. And for a moment, creation itself exhaled, grateful, content, unafraid. Thus ended the storm, and thus began the reign of Olympus. Not perfect, not eternal, but luminous, a divine reflection of the mortal heart that would forever dream of the gods above the clouds. When the world had settled into order, and the new gods ruled from Olympus, the earth below was still quiet, waiting to be shaped. The rivers flowed, the winds whispered, the stars burned steadily, but there was no one to see them, no heart to wonder at their beauty. It was Prometheus who noticed this silence and could not bear it. He was not like the other titans who had fought against Zeus. Though born of the old race, he had sided with the new gods, wise, far-seeing, and unafraid of change. Prometheus loved the earth, as one might love a sleeping child. He walked across its valleys and shores, feeling its stillness, and he thought, "It is beautiful, but lonely." So he knelt upon the riverbank and gathered the soft clay. With patient hands, he shaped figures small and fragile, molding them after the image of the gods. He gave them upright form, eyes to look toward the sky, and fingers delicate enough to touch. When he was done, he blew upon them not a divine breath, but something gentler, a spark of curiosity, and the figures shivered, blinked, and stood. Thus humankind began neither divine nor beast, but something in between, born of earth yet yearning upward. They walked, but they did not yet know warmth. They gazed at the sun, but could not hold its light. When night fell, they huddled in darkness, whispering to one another, afraid of the cold that crept through their fragile skin. And Prometheus, watching from the hills, felt a sorrow he had not known before pity. He went to Olympus and spoke to Zeus. "Father of gods, grant them fire. Without it they will perish, and the world you rule will echo with their fear." But Zeus looked down upon the mortals and frowned. Let them learn endurance. The gift of fire belongs to us alone. With it comes power, and with power, pride. Do not bring them what will only teach them defiance." Prometheus bowed, but he did not turn away in acceptance. For in his heart, he felt that compassion was a greater law than obedience. He descended again to earth and stood upon a mountain peak, where clouds drifted like silver smoke around him. There, he waited until night, when the gods slept, and the stars kept their quiet watch. He climbed higher, until he reached the edge of heaven where the sun rested in its golden chariot. From its rim he took a single flame, small as a heartbeat, bright as dawn. He hid it within a hollow stalk of fennel and carried it down through the chill wind. And when he reached the valley where humankind trembled, he placed the flame upon the ground. At first, they only stared. Then one reached out, hesitant, and felt its warmth. It did not burn, it breathed. Light spilled across their faces, and shadows began to dance. They laughed, the sound new and trembling, and the world was no longer silent. With fire came life. They learned to cook, to shape metal, to craft shelter, to tell stories in the flicker of its glow. Their eyes shone brighter, their hearts grew braver. For the first time, night was no longer something to fear. It became a canvas for their dreams. But on Olympus, Zeus saw the fire's glow rising from the valleys, and his heart hardened. He knew who had done it. "Prometheus," he said, "has stolen the light of the gods. For that, he shall learn the weight of his gift." The punishment was cruel but certain. Prometheus was bound to a rock at the edge of the world, high upon the Caucasus Mountains. Chains of adamantine, forged by Hephaestus himself, bit into his flesh. Each morning, an eagle descended, vast, merciless, and tore at his liver. Each night, it grew back, and the torment began anew. The wind howled through the cliffs, carrying his pain across the centuries. Yet Prometheus did not cry for mercy. He looked to the horizon where humankind tended their fires and whispered, "It was worth it." Even Zeus, in his silent moments, could not ignore the endurance of the Titan he had condemned. He saw the mortals thriving, their songs rising, their tools gleaming, their hearts filled with courage. Fire had not made them proud, it had made them alive. But his pride was too heavy to admit it. Instead, he sought to remind them of their fragility. He called upon Hephaestus once more, saying, "Forge me a gift, something beautiful and terrible." And from bronze and breath, the smith shaped Pandora, the first woman. Her face shone with grace, her eyes full of wonder. Each god gave her a gift: beauty from Aphrodite, music from Apollo, curiosity from Hermes, and patience from Demeter. But hidden among these blessings was a jar sealed, glowing faintly, which Zeus gave her without explanation. "Keep this," he said. "Guard it well." But mortals are mirrors of their makers, and curiosity, once born, cannot sleep. Pandora, left alone, listened to the hum inside the jar, a sound like voices trying to remember their names. At last, she lifted the lid. Out rushed sorrow, disease, greed, envy, all the quiet hungers that shadow joy. They scattered across the earth, and the air grew heavy with human ache. Pandora fell to her knees, weeping, her hands trembling around the empty vessel. But from its depths, one last thing remained, faint and small, like the flicker of dying fire. It whispered softly, refusing to leave. It was hope. Hope curled itself in the hearts of humankind, glowing dimly but steady. It could not erase pain, but it could outlast it. It was the ember that refused to die, the warmth that persisted even when the world turned cold again. From his mountain, bound and bleeding, Prometheus felt that warmth reach him. He closed his eyes and smiled. The chain still held, The eagle still came, yet something in him was free. He had given not just fire, but the courage to keep it burning. And in time for time softens even the hardest gods, Zeus would look again upon the mortals, their fires glowing like scattered stars. He would remember the Titan who had dared to love too deeply, and though he never said it, a quiet forgiveness would stir within him, because even for gods, the light of compassion is a fire that never truly dies. After the thunder of war had faded, Olympus glowed in stillness. The new gods had found their thrones. The air was filled with music, prayers, and the hum of mortal life below. Yet peace, even among immortals, is never without shadow. For love, divine or human, is the oldest storm the world has ever known. Zeus ruled the heavens with power both gentle and immense. From his throne of cloud and gold, he looked down upon the earth, watching its valleys bloom, its seas shimmer, and its people build altars in his name. But with power came longing, not the hunger of cruelty, but the ache of curiosity, the desire to know every shape of beauty that creation held. He loved deeply, often, and recklessly, as only an immortal could. Hera, his queen, sat beside him, radiant and unyielding. She was the goddess of fidelity and order, the guardian of sacred vows. Her love for Zeus burned steady, but within that flame hid the sharp edge of pride. To her, love was not possession, it was promise. And each time Zeus strayed, that promise trembled. Their marriage became a mirror of all others. Devotion laced with disappointment, tenderness shadowed by jealousy. The gods who ruled the world carried within themselves the very contradictions they governed. And so began the stories whispered between stars of divine affection and divine retribution, of mortals caught between the gaze of love and the weight of envy. The first was Io, a priestess of Hera herself, young, devoted, her face bright as dawn. Zeus saw her one morning as mist gathered above a meadow, and something in her stillness drew him. He descended, cloaked in cloud, and spoke to her softly, not as God to mortal, but as one lonely heart to another. But the sky has no secrets from the queen who rules it. Hera saw the veil of mist and descended in wrath, her presence cracking the air like sudden ice. Zeus, fearing her fury, transformed Io into a white cow, pure, silent, unrecognizable. But Hera, knowing too well the tricks of her husband, asked sweetly for the cow as a gift. Zeus could not refuse without confession, and so Io was led away, chained to Hera's watchful guardian, the 100-eyed Argus. Night and day, those eyes never closed. Pity moved through Olympus. Hermes, at Zeus's bidding, came to free her, playing his flute until Argus's many lids drooped shut. With one swift stroke, he ended the watch, and Io fled across the earth, wandering through seas and deserts, her hooves cutting paths that would one day bear her name. Even in freedom, she trembled, pursued by Hera's gadfly, stung by memory more than pain. But when she reached the edge of the Nile, Zeus touched her again, and her form was restored human, weary, and radiant. From her descendants, kings would rise, and the memory of her journey would outlive every temple. Another tale followed of Leto, the gentle one, bearer of Zeus's children. When Hera learned of her pregnancy, she sent every land and sea into denial, forbidding any place to give Leto refuge. Homeless, the goddess wandered, clutching her swollen belly, her steps echoing over the ocean's surface. At last, a floating island, Delos, took pity and let her rest. There, under the trembling shade of an olive tree, she gave birth to twins, Apollo, radiant as the sun, and Artemis, quiet as the moon. The cries of the newborn gods rose into the sky, and even Hera, hearing them, turned her face away, not softened, but silent. Zeus loved his children fiercely. Apollo became the god of light and music, the healer and the seer. His voice carried the rhythm of truth. Artemis, his sister, roamed the forests with her bow, protector of beasts and maidens alike. They were twins in balance, day and night, reason and instinct, two halves of harmony. From Leto's suffering, the world inherited beauty, the calm after pain, the music after silence. But the pattern continued, as patterns always do. From desire came creation, from jealousy, transformation. The cycle did not judge it, simply turned. So came the story of Semele, mortal princess of Thebes, who dared to love Zeus openly. He visited her in secret, cloaked in gentleness, his divinity veiled so as not to harm her. Yet Hera, whose patience had grown thin as winter light, disguised herself as an old woman and came to Semele. She spoke softly, feeding doubt like poison in water. If he truly loves you, let him come to you as he comes to his queen, not hidden, but in full glory. Semele, trusting and proud, made the wish, and when Zeus appeared again, she asked it of him. Bound by oath, he could not refuse. He came to her as the god of thunder, radiant, burning, unbearable. In the instant she beheld him, her mortal body could not endure, and she was turned to ash. But from her ashes, Zeus snatched the unborn child and sewed it into his own thigh. Months later, from that unlikely womb, Dionysus was born, god of wine, ecstasy, and rebirth. From ruin came rapture, from loss, the joy of becoming. The mortals would tell these stories for centuries of gods who loved too much and punished too fiercely, of beauty that turned to suffering and back again. And always, Hera remained, her pride eternal, her pine unending. She did not stop loving Zeus. She only forgot how to forgive him. Their quarrels shook Olympus, but beneath them flowed the same truth that guided all things, that even immortality could not free the heart from longing. The poets later said that love among the gods was a mirror of the human soul, luminous, fractured, and endlessly repeating. It was not good or evil, right or wrong, it was rhythm. Where there is desire, there is consequence. Where there is devotion, there is grief. The gods did not escape this, they only lived it forever. And so, when the night grows quiet and the moon leans over the sea, one might still feel that old ache in the air, the pulse of something beautiful and flawed, reaching endlessly toward itself. It is the same longing that keeps stars burning and hearts beating, the same fire Prometheus once gave, flickering through love and sorrow alike. The gods, for all their power, were only learning what humans would one day understand, that to love is to accept the shadow it casts. There came a time when the gods, having shaped the world, and the sea, and the stars above, turned their gaze toward the cities of humankind. Each town and valley built in their honor sought a protector, a name to whisper, a symbol to bless its gates. Among these rising places was one that stood by a bright blue bay, ringed with stone hills and silver light. Its people were wise and curious, their hearts drawn to the sea but their hands shaped for building. It was here that two mighty gods laid claim: Poseidon, lord of the deep, and Athena, goddess of wisdom. Poseidon came first, striding from the waves with the gleam of foam in his beard. The sea followed him like a living crown. He lifted his trident high and struck the rock beside the city. From the crack burst a spring of salt water, surging and brilliant, roaring with power. "Behold my gift," he said, "the mark of strength and dominion. With me as your guardian, you will rule all who sail upon the sea." The people gasped at the spectacle. The spray glittered like starlight, and the sound of it echoed through the valley. Yet when they reached to taste the water, it was sharp and briny, undrinkable. Then came Athena, her step quiet, her robe woven of dusk and thought. She carried no thunder, no wave, only a small seed in her hand. Without a word, she knelt beside the same rock and pressed the seed into the soil. The ground quivered, and from it rose a tree, slender, silver, alive. Its leaves shimmered in the sun like green fire. Its fruit hung golden and soft. "This," she said, "is my gift, the olive tree. It brings nourishment, warmth, and light. Its fruit feeds, its oil heals, its wood endures. It is not a gift of conquest, but of peace." The people stood between the spring and the tree, unsure which blessing to choose, might or wisdom, tempest or patience. Poseidon's eyes burned with pride. Athena's shone with calm certainty. Zeus, watching from Olympus, spoke at last. "Let the people decide whose gift will serve them best." They gathered around the olive tree. Its branches swayed in a wind that carried the scent of life itself. The fruit gleamed with promise, and in its shade they felt something deep and still, the quiet of a home, the slow rhythm of growth. When they looked again at the sea, it was beautiful but distant, restless and vast. And so they chose Athena. Poseidon did not rage, though the tide beneath his feet turned dark. He struck the ground once more, and the salt spring retreated into stone, leaving behind a faint echo of waves, a reminder that power always lingers, even when refused. Athena bowed her head, not in victory, but in respect. She named the city Athens, and the people built her temple upon the hill, the Acropolis, where her tree would stand for generations, its leaves whispering wisdom to every wind. The years passed, and Athens flourished under her spirit. Its people learned to reason and to create. They carved marble and shaped music, built schools and temples, and sought truth not in thunder, but in thought. The olive tree grew old and wide, its roots entwined with the city's stones, a living memory of the day patience had triumphed over pride. Yet even wisdom, like light, casts a shadow. Among Athena's followers was a woman named Arachne, whose gift was weaving. Her hands could spin silk so fine it seemed spun from air. Her patterns shimmered like the wings of dawn. She was born immortal, but her talent drew attention even from the gods. People came from distant lands to watch her loom, and whispered that perhaps Athena herself had taught her. Arachne would smile, proud but serene. "The goddess taught me nothing," she would say. "My skill is my own." The words were small, but the sky heard them. And Athena, though wise, was not beyond the touch of pride herself. One evening, she descended to the mortal world, cloaked as an old woman, her staff tapping softly against the stones. She approached Arachne and said, "Child, be grateful for what the gods grant. None weave as you do yet. It is folly to forget who gives inspiration." Arachne lifted her head, her eyes bright with youth. "If the goddess believes herself my equal," she said, "let her come and prove it." A hush fell over the workshop. Athena's disguise faded, and in her place stood the goddess, radiant, stern, her eyes like calm fire. "Then let us weave," Athena said. Two looms stood side by side. For hours they worked in silence, the air filled with the soft rhythm of thread, crossing thread. Athena wove scenes of harmony, gods guiding mortals, order rising from chaos, justice in every gesture. Arachne, her fingers swift and sure, wove something else, the stories mortals whispered in secret. The deceptions of Zeus, the jealousies of Hera, the punishments cast upon the innocent. Her tapestry shimmered with truth too sharp to be denied. When they were done, Athena looked upon Arachne's work, flawless, beautiful, and painfully honest. For a long time she said nothing. Then, quietly, she tore the tapestry in half, not out of rage, but sorrow. "You have woven truth," she said, but without reverence. And truth without reverence becomes pride. Arachne bowed her head, her eyes filled with tears not of fear, but of shame. "Forgive me," she whispered. Athena touched her gently. "Your hands were made for creation, not destruction. You shall weave forever, but not as human." She brushed her fingers across Arachne's hair, and the girl's form began to change. Her arms thinned into many threads. Her body grew small and light. When the wind stilled, a spider hung from a single silver line, spinning endlessly. And so, Arachne continued her art, weaving patterns in the dark corners of the world, her silken webs catching both light and dust. In her, Athena's lesson lived on, that even wisdom must bow to humility, and that beauty, when divorced from respect, becomes its own undoing. Under the olive tree of Athens, the breeze still carries that quiet truth. Strength may dazzle, but patience endures. Pride may shout, but wisdom whispers, and its voice, though soft, is the one that lasts. They were born together, light, and its reflection, song and silence. From the wandering pain of their mother, Leto, came two children who would forever walk the sky in balance. When the twins first cried upon the island of Delos, the air itself brightened. The olive trees bent as if in reverence, and even the waves, usually restless, slowed to listen. In that moment, the sun found its purpose, and the moon learned to wait. Apollo grew radiant and golden, with hair like flame caught in the wind. In his eyes, truth was not a word but a melody, something that could be sung into being. He was the god of light, of music and prophecy, of every thought that sought harmony between heart and reason. Where he walked, fields ripened, and illness withdrew like mist before morning. His temples would one day fill with poets and healers, all seeking clarity beneath his calm gaze. Artemis, his twin, moved differently, not with radiance, but with grace. She loved the forest and the moonlit silence between trees. Her bow was silver, her step weightless. Where Apollo's laughter filled the sky, hers filled the woods with quiet awe. She was the huntress, the guardian of animals, of birth and endings alike. When night rose, she walked beside it, not as shadow, but as peace. Together, they were the balance the world did not know it needed. Day and night, creation and retreat, clarity and mystery. And yet, like all light, their brilliance drew both reverence and peril. When Apollo reached manhood, he went to claim his sacred place at Delphi, a valley wrapped in smoke and song, where a monstrous serpent, the Python, coiled beneath the earth. It was said that the creature had crawled from the mud left by the great flood, guarding the ancient shrine of Gaia herself. Its breath was poison, its scales darker than regret. Apollo descended with his silver bow, each step calm as a heartbeat. The wind held its breath as he drew the string. One arrow, clear, unshaking, flew. The python writhed, the mountains echoed, and at last, silence fell. From that silence rose the temple of prophecy. Over its gates, the words would later be carved, "Know thyself." For Apollo, victory was not the end of the serpent, but the beginning of understanding that light can cleanse, but it can also blind. Every truth cast a shadow somewhere, and he would spend eternity learning to live within that glow. But the gods, for all their grace, carried the same ache that moved the hearts of mortals longing. And love, when it found Apollo, came as swiftly as his own arrows. He saw her by a river, her hair tangled with sunlight, Daphne, daughter of a river god, spirit of the laurel grove. She was wild, her laughter like wind, her eyes sharp with freedom. When Apollo approached, his voice gentle, she turned and fled. He called her name, promising no harm, only wonder, but the chase had already begun. The forest blurred. The air shimmered with heat. Branches clawed at her as she ran, and her breath came like prayer. "Father," she cried, "change me, hide me, let me be free." And the river god heard. Her feet rooted, her skin grew bark, her hair became leaves of shimmering green. When Apollo reached her, he found not a woman, but a tree. He fell to his knees, tears glimmering like sunlight on water. He pressed his hand to the trunk, feeling her heart still beating within the wood. "If you will not be mine," he whispered, "then let your leaves crown poets and victors alike." End. And so, from that sorrow, the laurel became sacred, not a symbol of possession, but of reverence. From love denied came beauty eternal. Artemis, too, carried her share of stories, not of pursuit, but of defense. She asked for no lovers, made no vows. Her purity was solitude, not pride, a promise to herself to remain untouched by desire's consuming fire. Yet mortals, in their wonder, sometimes forgot to respect her distance. One dusk, a young hunter named Actaeon wandered through the forest, lost and thirsty. He came upon a glade where silver light rippled through the air, Artemis bathing in the still pool. The sight struck him silent, not with lust, but with awe. He tried to turn away, but the goddess had seen him. Her eyes, calm but unyielding, met his. "Since you have seen what no mortal should," she said softly, "then let your eyes become your undoing." She raised her hand, and the air shimmered. Actaeon felt his body shift, his limbs splintering into hooves, his voice breaking into the cry of a stag. He fled in terror through the forest, only to be chased down by his own hounds. They did not know their master's face, only his scent. By dawn, the clearing was quiet again, the pool unbroken, the goddess gone. Such tales were whispered through the valleys, of Artemis, who loved without touch, and of Apollo, who touched and lost. Together they taught the world that beauty is both blessing and warning, that light draws the gaze, but also casts the longest shadow. At times, Apollo would play his lyre upon a hill, while Artemis listened from the trees. His music rose like morning, her silence answered like dusk. Between them, the balance held brother and sister, desire and restraint, sound and stillness. Even Zeus, hearing their harmony, would smile, for it was rare that gods remembered the grace of limits. And so the twins of light and shadow continued their dance through eternity. Apollo's sun crossed the sky, painting warmth upon the world. Artemis's moon followed, softening its edges. Each night, when their paths met at the horizon, they lingered for a breath, day surrendering to night, night yielding to day. In that moment, the world seemed whole, and though mortals would tell endless stories of them, of triumphs and tempers, of passion and purity, their truest lesson was quiet, that every brilliance carries its darkness, and every shadow holds a trace of light. Without one, the other could not exist. It is not the sun or the moon alone that makes the world beautiful. It is their meeting in between, the tender silence where both belong. Time, even for gods, moves like a quiet current. Ages passed, each leaving behind its own scent of memory, of laughter, of labor, of loss. The mortals below Olympus, once gentle as spring and pure as the dawn, began to change. The warmth of the golden age faded into something colder, heavier, as if the light of innocence had thinned, leaving only the echo of what it once was. In the beginning, under the rule of Cronus, humankind had lived without pain or want. They ate what the earth gave freely. They died as softly as sleep. But after Zeus's victory and the coming of the new order, the ages began to turn like a great wheel. Each spoke of the wheel bore a different color, each one duller than the last. First came the Silver Age, bright but restless. Men grew tall and curious. yet their minds were still young. They built houses and learned craft, but forgot gratitude. They spoke often, but listened little. Their hearts still sought the gods, but their hands began to shape idols from their own desires. When the storms came, they did not bow, they shouted. And Zeus, looking down, felt a weariness that no thunder could release. Then came the Bronze Age, hard and shining like the metal itself. Men's bodies grew stronger, their hearts more distant. They dug into the earth to draw out weapons, and the ground that once fed them now fed their quarrels. The rivers ran red more often than clear, and the wind carried the sound of marching feet. It was not cruelty that filled their eyes, but hunger, the endless desire to become more than human, even if it meant becoming less. The gods withdrew their faces, and the songs of temples grew faint. Only the echo of war answered the sky. Even the soil seemed to sigh beneath their weight, whispering to Gaia for rest. But the earth endures longer than the hearts of men. She waited, patient, her pulse slow, as if she already knew that every storm must eventually wash itself away. Then came the Iron Age, the darkest and most fragile of all. In this age, men were clever, but cruel. They learned to measure stars, yet forgot the warmth of the hearth. They built cities, but not peace. Greed replaced gratitude. Law replaced kindness. Even family became fractured. Sons turned against fathers, and love became bargain. Zeus watched from Olympus and felt a silence gather within him. He had given them fire, mind, and will, and yet they had turned each gift into a tool of separation. The gods, once worshipped, were now questioned, doubted, even mocked. The balance that once tied heaven to earth had frayed into dust. So he called a council, and the sky trembled at his voice. The earth, he said, is ill with arrogance. Its children poison it with pride. The fields no longer rest. The rivers carry blood instead of rain. I will cleanse it and let it begin again. The others did not speak. Even Athena lowered her eyes, for wisdom cannot always argue with necessity. Zeus turned his gaze to the horizon and summoned the clouds. The winds obeyed, and the heavens darkened. Rain began as mist, then thickened into torrents. The sea rose, swallowing coast and field alike. Mountains blurred beneath the endless grey. Forests drowned where they stood. For 9 days and nights, the world became one ocean, and the sky no longer knew where to end. Yet in that drowning silence, 2 souls endured, Deucalion and Pyrrha. He was the son of Prometheus. She, the daughter of Epimetheus and Pandora. Perhaps compassion ran in their blood, for they alone had listened to the whisper of warning. Prometheus, bound yet watchful, had sent them word through the winds: build an ark and trust the mountain. They labored in quiet faith, carving a vessel from cedar and pitch. When the flood came, they entered together, carrying only a few seeds, a few flames, and the memory of love. The waters lifted them high above the world's grief. They saw nothing but sky reflected in water, no land, no bird, no sound but the heartbeat of the rain. At last, on the 10th dawn, the rain ceased. The clouds thinned like torn veils, and sunlight returned, shy and silver. Their boat came to rest upon the peak of Parnassus, the mountain of prophecy. Zeus looked down, and his heart, though stern, softened. He saw their humility, their endurance, their faith in a world that had vanished. So he calmed the waters, and the sea folded itself back into its boundaries. The land that emerged was quiet and strange, washed clean of memory. Deucalion and Pyrrha stepped out, trembling not from fear, but from awe. They walked through silence, surrounded by the ghosts of what had been, and wondered how to begin again. They went to the temple of Themis, goddess of law and justice, whose altar still stood above the floodline. They prayed, "O wise one, tell us how we may restore the race of men." The oracle's voice rose from the stones. "Cover your heads and cast behind you the bones of your mother." One. They looked at one another in confusion. "Surely we cannot defile the dead," Pyrrha whispered. But Deucalion pondered the words. "Our mother," he said softly, "is the earth itself. Her bones are the stones beneath our feet." And so they obeyed. With veiled faces, they walked and cast stones behind them. The stones that Deucalion threw became men strong and steady. The stones from Pyrrha's hands became women graceful and enduring. From the earth's bones, humanity was reborn. Not perfect, not pure, but humble, made of patience and stone. The new people learned slowly. They remembered the flood not as punishment, but as reminder that the world survives not through power, but through balance, not through pride, but through care. The rivers flowed gently again, and seeds took root where tears had fallen. Even Zeus, looking down, felt peace. He had not destroyed the world. He had returned it to silence, so it could learn to sing anew. And so the ages turned once more. The golden age did not return, it was never meant to. But from the clay of sorrow grew endurance, and from endurance, wisdom. Humankind would forget, and remember, and forget again yet always. Somewhere, a remnant would keep faith with the earth. For the gods had learned too, that creation does not end with wrath. It ends, always, with renewal. And the rain that once destroyed now glitters quietly in the soil, not as a threat, but as promise. When the flood waters had long receded, and the new earth began to breathe again, stories rose with the dawn not of gods alone, but of mortals who dared to reach beyond their limits. The age of heroes had begun. It was not an age of peace, nor of easy virtue. It was a time when courage was measured not by triumph, but by endurance, the quiet resolve to continue when even the gods looked away. From these stories, 3 names came to stand like constellations across the centuries: Perseus, Heracles, and Theseus. Their deeds would be sung in temples and whispered beside fires, but what gave them greatness was not strength alone. It was the stillness of their hearts, the way they bore suffering without bitterness, and victory without pride. The first, Perseus, was born of shadow and light son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Danae. His life began in fear. His grandfather, warned that the child would bring his death, sealed mother and son in a chest and cast them into the sea. The waves carried them gently, as if refusing to be cruel, until they came to rest upon a quiet shore. From that beginning of exile, Perseus learned the nature of hope, that it does not roar, it endures. When he was grown, the king of the island mocked him, demanding an impossible gift, the head of the Gorgon Medusa, whose gaze turned life into stone. No mortal had faced her and lived. But Perseus, guided by Athena's calm and Hermes' cunning, did not despair. He did not fight her with rage. He fought with patience. Using a polished shield as mirror, he approached the monster backward, never meeting her deadly eyes. The blade fell swift and sure, and the silence that followed was not of horror, but of release. Even monsters, it seemed, longed for peace. When he returned, Perseus did not boast. He placed the head upon the ground and freed his mother from tyranny. In his wake, beauty bloomed. Where fear had once stood for, from Medusa's spilled blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, symbol of imagination freed from terror. From violence came flight. Then came Heracles, born of strength and sorrow intertwined. He was the son of Zeus and a mortal woman. Yet, unlike Perseus, his life began under the weight of Hera's wrath. She sent serpents into his cradle, but the infant crushed them with his bare hands, not in anger, but in instinct. All his life would follow that pattern. Battles not sought, but endured. The world remembers Heracles for his 12 labors, but those who listen more softly hear something else. Not conquest, but cleansing. Each trial was a dialogue between man and fate, between burden and meaning. He slew the lion of Nemea, but learned first that no hide is invincible. He wore the beast's pelt, not as trophy, but as reminder that strength can also protect. He captured the stag of Artemis without shedding its blood, because reverence too is power. He cleaned the stables of Augeas, not by force, but by redirection, turning rivers through the filth, teaching that wisdom can move mountains where fists cannot. And yet, the greatest of his labors was not one set by kings or gods. It was forgiveness of himself. Haunted by madness sent by Hera, he had once destroyed what he loved most. For years, he carried that silence like a wound. Every deed, every burden, was his way of learning to live again. When his mortal body at last burned upon the pyre, it was not tragedy, it was release. The flames that consumed him did not punish, they purified. And the gods, watching, were silent in reverence. For even Zeus, his father, understood that no divine act could match the courage of a man who endures his own heart. The third was Theseus, the thinker among warriors, born of both Athens and mystery. He came not to destroy, but to unite, to turn chaos into order. Before him, the lands of Attica were scattered, each ruled by pride and small kings. Theseus brought them together, not by war, but by trust, by walking among them as one of their own. In this, he built more than a city. He built the idea of belonging. His greatest test lay beneath the earth, the labyrinth, a maze of endless corridors built to contain the Minotaur, half man, half beast, born from human arrogance. Each year, the people of Athens sent youths to be devoured, and Theseus, tired of sacrifice, volunteered to go. With the help of Ariadne, who loved him and gave him a thread to find his way back, he entered the dark. The creature he found was not only monstrous, but pitiable, trapped, furious, alone. When the fight was done, Theseus did not rejoice. He emerged into the light carrying both victory and sorrow, for he had seen what the gods themselves often forgot, that evil is not always chosen, and that courage does not always heal. Each hero walked a different road. Perseus with his patience, Heracles with his endurance, Theseus with his wisdom, yet all shared a single truth, that divinity does not lie in power, but in persistence. Their stories, though told in temples with marble and gold, belong to the quiet places, to anyone who has ever faced despair and kept moving. The gods watched them from above, and in their immortal hearts, something softened. For the heroes reminded them of the one thing immortality could not give: the bravery born of limitation. To live, knowing one's end, and to strive anyway, was the highest form of worship. And so, though centuries have passed, and their names have turned to dust, the echo of their footsteps still moves beneath the world. In every act of courage, in every hand that rises despite exhaustion, they live again. For even the gods, eternal and untouchable, still bend their gaze toward the mortal spark and whisper, not in thunder, but in quiet admiration. They endure. In the stillness between ages, when gods watched more than they spoke, and heroes had begun to fade into memory, the world became quieter, as if holding its breath. The wars had slowed, the temples stood, and mortals turned inward. They began to ask softer questions, not how to conquer, but how to understand, not how to survive, but how to love. And somewhere, beyond time and thunder, three silent figures sat weaving. They were the Fates, the Moirai, who spun every thread of life from the same loom. Clotho, the spinner, drew the first line of being, Lachesis measured its length. Atropos cut it when it was done. They did not argue. They did not hurry. To them, time was not a river, but a fabric. Each life, a fiber crossing another, some bright, some frayed, all necessary. Even the gods could not change their weaving, only watch it glimmer through the darkness. From their quiet hands, countless patterns unfolded, threads of love and loss, of longing and creation, the same story retold in different shades. Among them shimmered two that would never fade, the tales of Narcissus and Echo, and Pygmalion and Galatea. The first began by a pool so clear it seemed the sky had fallen into it. There lived Narcissus, a youth of extraordinary beauty, not cruel, only unaware. Every heart that saw him turned toward him like a flower to the sun, but he looked upon them as one might look upon shadows with gentle indifference. Among those hearts was Echo, a nymph whose voice was her gift and her curse. Once she had spoken freely, filling the mountains with laughter and song, until Hera, angered by her chatter, took her voice away, leaving her only the power to repeat what others said. When Echo saw Narcissus walking through the woods, she felt a pull deeper than memory. She followed him quietly, repeating his words back to him in fragments, a music of longing and distance. He heard her, puzzled, and called, "Who's there?" And she answered, "There." He smiled slightly. "Come to me." And she whispered, trembling, "To me." She stepped forward, arms open, but he drew back. "Do not touch me," he said, and her voice returned to him, broken. "Touch me." She fled into the trees, her heart fading, until only her voice remained, still wandering, still repeating the words of others, never her own. But the gods, who love symmetry, were not done. Narcissus, still wandering, came upon a spring still and perfect, untouched by wind. He knelt to drink, and saw in its depths a face more radiant than the dawn. He did not know it was his own. He reached for it, and the reflection reached back. He smiled, and it smiled too. He fell in love not with himself, but with the illusion of someone who would always understand him, always stay, and never speak. He lingered by the pool, forgetting to eat or sleep, his hand brushing the water again and again, as if it might one day hold him. The ripples distorted the image, and his heart broke each time it blurred. When he died, the earth grew kind and took pity. From the spot where his body fell, a white flower bloomed. It leaned always toward the water, forever gazing at its own reflection, gentle, eternal, and alone. And Echo, watching from the hills, whispered his name until even the stones remembered it. Another thread glowed softly beside it, the story of Pygmalion, a sculptor of Cyprus. He had seen too much of the world's cruelty and grown weary of human imperfection. In his solitude, he carved what he believed could not be found, a woman made of ivory, shaped with such grace that even the air seemed to hold its breath. He named her Galatea. Each day, he touched her hand, smoothed her hair, spoke to her as if she could hear. He brought her flowers, draped her in fine cloth, and in the silence of his studio, he began to believe that warmth stirred beneath the marble. He dreamed of her not as statue, but as soul. And though he never said it aloud, the gods heard the prayer behind his silence. Aphrodite, moved by the purity of his longing, came unseen into the workshop one evening. The moonlight that fell through the window brightened. The stone seemed to breathe. When Pygmalion kissed Galatea's lips in despair, they warmed beneath his own. Her eyes opened not with surprise, but recognition, as if she had been waiting to be seen. From that moment, the sculptor and his creation walked the same road, not perfect, not divine, but tender, For love had made art into life, and life into gratitude. The hands that once carved learned to hold. The lips that prayed learned to answer. These tales of Echo's yearning, Narcissus's reflection, Pygmalion's faith are not warnings so much as mirrors. They ask softly what it means to love another, to love beauty, to love the idea of being seen. They remind us that creation and desire share the same pulse, both are attempts to reach what cannot be fully touched. The Fates watched these stories weave into the pattern of the world and smiled their quiet, knowing smile. They understood that longing is not failure, but motion the thread that keeps the fabric alive. Even heartbreak has its place in the tapestry. It makes the bright colors shine clearer, the gentle ones deeper, for in the still pool of every human heart lies the same reflection, the wish to be known, and the fear of being forgotten. Love looks into that water and sometimes mistakes its own face for another's. Art, in turn, reaches into that water and draws something new from it, not perfect, but alive. And so the threads continue to turn silver, gold, ash and flame, weaving stories of beauty and ruin side by side. The Fates do not pause. Their hands move as steadily as breath, as inevitable as dawn, and somewhere, in the quiet hum of their loom, the world remembers that every act of love, every act of creation, is the same defiance of ending, a single, shining echo that says, "I was here." When the dust of centuries settles, what remains are not the battles or the crowns, but the stories. They linger like embers after the fire, soft, glowing, impossible to extinguish. The gods themselves may fade, their temples turn to ruin, their names weathered by time, yet the myths endure, not as commandments, not as truths carved in stone, but as murmurs of the human soul shifting, alive, forever retold. Perhaps that is their quiet immortality. They do not ask to be believed, only remembered. They breathe through our retelling, changing as we change. Each age finds its own reflection in them, its fears, its longing, its fragile hopes. They live not in marble, but in breath, and in that way, they are more eternal than any god who ever ruled Olympus. The ancients, who first spoke these tales around firelight, never sought perfection in them. They knew that a perfect story is a dead one. Instead, they gave us contradictions, gods who love and wound, heroes who save and destroy, mortals who reach for heaven and fall gently back to earth. Each myth was a mirror held to the heart, showing not what we ought to be, but what we already are. Zeus, with his thunder and flaws, taught power's fragility. Hera, wounded and proud, became the echo of every love that has ever asked too much. Athena stood for reason, yet could be cruel to those who forgot humility. Even kind Demeter could bring winter when her grief grew too heavy. And the mortals from Perseus to Heracles, from Daphne to Narcissus, showed that the distance between humanity and divinity is not height, but honesty. In these contradictions lies the tenderness of myth. They tell us that to be great is not to be flawless, but to continue despite the flaw. The gods fell in love, made mistakes, envied, forgave not because they were human, but because the human heart is divine in its restlessness. We have always looked upward and seen ourselves, blurred and bright in the same gaze. Time moved on, and the altars grew quiet. Temples turned to moss and sand. Their pillars stood like bones of a forgotten age. Yet even as names faded, even as the language that carried them turned to dust, something within those stories stayed awake. They were never about the gods alone. They were about us, our hunger for meaning, our awe before beauty, our smallness against eternity. Each myth, in its own way, whispers the same truth, that creation is not a single act, but a conversation between the world and the mind that tries to understand it. Prometheus's fire burns in every hand that dares to build. Athena's wisdom waits in every pause before anger. Artemis walks with every soul that seeks solitude without bitterness. Even Hades, so often feared, reminds us that rest, too, is sacred. The myths endure because they never insist. They invite. They are not sermons, but reflections. They do not command us to worship, only to listen, to see ourselves more clearly in their shimmering surface. When we hear them, we do not hear God speaking. We hear the long, patient voice of the human spirit asking the same questions, again and again. What is love? What is justice? What does it mean to be remembered? And somewhere beneath those questions lies an answer too soft for words, that perfection is not the goal, and loss is not the end. Every broken thing still carries light, and every light casts its shadow. To understand that is to understand the language of myth, the way beauty is always born beside its opposite. The old poets knew this well. They told their tales not to instruct, but to soothe. When they spoke of gods, they spoke of the weather within the soul, storms and stillness, drought and bloom. Each listener found something different, a comfort, a warning, a mirror, and so the myths continued to live, not through fear, but through recognition. Perhaps that is why they still find us, even now, in the quiet of modern nights. We no longer build temples of stone, yet we still build temples of memory. We still light small fires and tell each other stories of light and darkness, of what we have loved and lost. In the flicker of a screen or the hum of a whispered tale, Olympus breathes again, not as power, but as presence. If the gods are forgotten, they are not gone. They have simply changed form. They exist now in every artist who shapes meaning from silence, in every dreamer who looks toward the sky and wonders if someone might still be listening. They live in the spaces between words, in the longing that keeps us awake, in the forgiveness that helps us sleep. And so, the myths persist not because they are perfect, but because we are not. They walk beside us like old friends, patient, unhurried. We return to them not for answers, but for company. They remind us that even the divine falters, and that in our faltering, we are divine. When the fates finish their weaving and the last thread glows faintly in the dusk, perhaps they smile, because they know that nothing truly ends. Every story, every love, every act of creation continues somewhere, quietly. It waits to be told again, in another voice, another century, another dream. And if one listens closely enough, through the hush of time and memory, one can still hear the echo of those ancient fires, the soft voices saying not believe, but remember, for remembrance itself is immortality. And myth, in its gentlest truth, has never been about gods at all, but about the light that refuses to go out. Night has always been the gentlest ending, not an absence, but a return. And so, as all stories must, the long tale of gods and mortals drifts now toward its quiet shore. The voices that once roared with thunder soften into murmurs, and in the hush between heartbeats, the loom begins to hum again. The fates are still there. They have never left. Beneath the veil of stars, they sit as they always have, patient, tireless, unseen. Their fingers move across the spindle, drawing from the dark the thin silver thread of existence. Each spin is a life, a dream, a word whispered into the vastness. Each thread, no matter how brief, adds its glimmer to the endless weave. Around them, the remnants of myth shimmer like dust suspended in moonlight. Zeus's thunder is no longer heard, but the sky still carries his grandeur. Hera's jealous heart beats faintly in every vow made, and every vow broken. Athena's wisdom hides in the pause before we speak. Apollo's light still touches music, and Artemis's calm still guards the silence of night. Even the laughter of Dionysus lingers in the rhythm of joy that breaks the weight of living. The gods sleep, but their dreams have become our language. From them came the shape of thought, how we name courage, how we measure beauty, how we understand the heart's contradictions. From them came our metaphors for longing, the fire that Prometheus stole, the wings of Icarus, the thread of Ariadne. We live surrounded by their echoes, even when we no longer remember where the echoes began. The myths, like constellations, do not command the heavens. They simply show us where to look. They remind us that meaning is not something given, it is something made, woven from fear and wonder, from loss and light. In every story we tell now of heroes, of lovers, of the fragile kindness that survives the years. The old loom turns beneath our words. Perhaps the fates hum to themselves as they work, a song older than language, the rhythm of beginning and ending intertwined. Their music is not sad, only vast, a lullaby for everything that has ever been, and for all that will follow. Listen closely, and you might still hear it. It is the sound that fills the spaces between moments, the hush after laughter, the breath before sleep, the silence that falls when a story finishes but refuses to leave. It is there, steady as the pulse beneath the world, turning, always turning. The myths have done their work. They have taught us to name the unnameable, to endure the unknown. They have given faces to our fears and shapes to our dreams. Even when we outgrew their temples, we did not outgrow their questions. For the gods were never about obedience, they were about wonder. And wonder, once awakened, never dies. Now, as the stars drift above the dark sea, we return to stillness. The flames that once told these stories fade into quiet embers. The old gods, weary but content, close their eyes. Olympus sleeps, but the sky remains, an endless scroll upon which every age will write its myths anew. Somewhere beyond the edge of dreams, the fates' loom continues, unhurried. Threads of light and shadow cross and merge, some bright with laughter, some dim with longing, but all belonging to the same vast pattern. Perhaps you, too, are part of that weaving, a single glint within the cloth of time, a note in the great, unending song. And perhaps, as you listen now, you can feel the spindle still turning, quietly, tenderly, somewhere beyond the reach of thought. Let the world dim, let the breath slow. The gods have spoken, the stories have found their rest, and the stars' patient witnesses keep their vigil. Close your eyes. The loom hums softly. The thread of your dream joins the tapestry. The night, gentle and infinite, gathers you in. And somewhere, far away but never lost, the spindle still turns. And now, the story quiets. The names, the empires, the fires all fade into the hush of time. What remains is only breath and the soft turning of the world beneath it. You don't need to remember the dates or the faces, just the feeling that even the loudest lives become gentle in the end. Let that thought rest with you tonight. If your eyes are heavy, let them close. The music will stay for a while, carrying you softly through what's left of the night. You are safe. The story is over. Now, only calm remains. Good night.